Have you ever discovered that your success wasn't really yours in your own family? Have you ever realized the harder you worked, the more people quietly assumed they were entitled to what you earned? For most of my life, that's exactly how things worked in my family. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm in my mid-40s, and I run a small financial consulting firm in Seattle. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. I built my career the slow way, one client at a time, one contract at a time, year after year. Discipline, patience, quiet progress. But inside my family, those things were never treated like achievements. They were treated like something useful, like a resource that could eventually be redirected. I noticed that pattern early. When I graduated at the top of my class, my mother hugged me and said she was proud. Then a moment later, she added that my younger sister Lena had something special too. A natural charisma that made people instantly like her. The conversation moved away from my accomplishment before it had even settled. Years later, when I bought my first condo at 29, my father didn't ask how I managed it or what sacrifices it took. Instead, he asked if I had considered helping Lena with her rent instead of tying money up in property. That was the first time I clearly understood the role I played in our family. Lena was the center of gravity. She was energetic, charming, always talking about the next big opportunity, an online fashion store, a business podcast, a real estate course she was excited to start. Each idea arrived full of excitement and possibility, and most of them quietly disappeared before they became real. Still, in my parents' eyes, Lena represented potential. I represented stability. At first, that sounded like praise. Being the stable one meant dependable, responsible, reliable. But over time, I realized what it actually meant. Stability meant I was the one expected to solve problems when things went wrong, especially financial ones. My daughter Sophie grew up watching this silent pattern unfold at every family dinner. She's quieter than Lena ever was, the kind of person who observes before speaking. While Lena filled the table with stories about her latest plan, Sophie usually waited politely to be asked about school. Sometimes, no one asked. She never complained, and that worried me more than anything. Because when Sophie reached her final year of college, the tone of my parents' conversations started changing. What once sounded like harmless suggestions now felt like something else entirely. It sounded like a plan. That was when the conversations in my family began to change in ways that were difficult to ignore. What once sounded like casual concern slowly started to feel more deliberate. Lena's student loans had been growing for years. At first, they were just numbers people mentioned occasionally, something temporary that would eventually sort itself out. But interest has a quiet way of turning small problems into heavy ones. Every year, the total seemed larger than before. My parents began talking about it more often. Not in direct requests, never in clear demands, but always close enough that I could hear the weight behind their words. My mother would sigh while mentioning how stressful things had become for Lena. My father would talk about how difficult it must be to carry that kind of burden so early in life. They described it as pressure, as circumstance, as something that had simply happened to her. Then one afternoon, my father finally said what had probably been forming in his mind for a long time. He said the family just wanted things to be fair. The word hung in the room for a moment. Fair. According to him, my situation was stable. My business was doing well, my finances were steady, and I had already found my footing. Lena, on the other hand, had faced obstacles. That was the word he chose. Obstacles. He said, if I was already thinking about setting money aside for future investments, perhaps I should consider helping my sister stabilize first. Then, he explained carefully, everyone in the family would be standing on equal ground. I didn't argue with him. I didn't promise anything either. I simply listened, because in that moment, something became very clear to me. In their minds, the money I had earned was already assigned somewhere else. But while those conversations were happening, I had quietly been thinking about a different future entirely. My daughter Sophie was about to graduate from college and start her first real job. I knew exactly what that stage of life felt like, the mixture of hope and anxiety that comes with stepping into adulthood while carrying financial weight. I didn't want her beginning that journey with the same pressure hanging over her shoulders. So, months earlier, without telling anyone, I started looking for a house. Nothing extravagant, nothing meant to impress people, just something solid and dependable, near where Sophie would be working. Eventually, I found a small 2-bedroom home in Tacoma, about 20 minutes from her office. The yard was modest, the structure simple, but the roof was strong and the plumbing reliable. It was the kind of place that could quietly become a foundation for a life. I paid for the house in full, but the name on the ownership documents wasn't mine. It was Sophie's. When the clerk stamped the final paperwork, the decision became permanent. And a few days later, at Sophie's graduation celebration, I arrived, carrying nothing more than a thin envelope. A few days later, the envelope I carried with me arrived at exactly the moment I had been waiting for. Sophie's graduation celebration took place in my parents' backyard, the same place where most family gatherings happened over the years. Folding chairs were lined up across the patio. A long table held a cake that was probably sweeter than necessary, and conversations floated through the warm afternoon air. It looked ordinary, almost comforting, the kind of gathering that makes everything appear normal, even when it isn't. Lena was already at the center of the table, telling a long story about another business idea she was excited about. Something about a partnership she might start soon. People nodded politely, just like they always did. Sophie stood beside me, in her graduation cap, smiling softly whenever relatives congratulated her. When it was time for gifts, I handed her the thin envelope I had brought. She looked at it, then at me. "Dad, what's this?" she asked quietly. I just smiled and told her to open it. She slid the papers out slowly. First, the keys fell into her palm. Then she noticed the documents underneath them. Sophie read a few lines and suddenly stopped. She blinked once, then again, as if her mind needed a moment to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. "Dad, what is this?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. I kept my voice calm. "It's your house." The silence didn't arrive all at once. It spread gradually across the yard as people realized what had just been said. Sophie's hands trembled slightly, not dramatically, just enough to show how unexpected the moment was. Lena leaned forward in her chair, curiosity replacing her smile. "Wait, what's going on?" she asked. But my father reacted before anyone else could speak. He stood up so quickly, his chair scraped loudly against the stone patio, and then he said something he probably hadn't planned to say out loud. That money was supposed to go toward Lena's loans. The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. No explanation was necessary. Everyone understood what it meant. For years, my family had quietly assumed that whatever I built would eventually be redirected toward Lena. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply said, "It's my money." And I decided to help my daughter. My mother stepped in gently, trying to smooth the moment. She said they had only thought I might help my sister first. I looked at Sophie, then back at them. I am helping my family, I said, and for the first time in many years, there was nothing anyone could do to change that decision. After that afternoon, the atmosphere in my family shifted in a way that didn't require anyone to explain it. No one argued again about the house. No one raised their voice or tried to reopen the conversation. But silence has its own language, and in the weeks that followed, that language became very clear. My father called less often than he used to. When he did call, the conversation stayed carefully neutral. He talked about the weather, about a neighbor repairing a fence, about small maintenance projects around the house, ordinary subjects, safe subjects, the kind that never came close to what had actually happened at Sophie's graduation. Lena never mentioned her loans again either. Through my mother, I heard that she had applied for a restructuring plan to manage the debt. For the first time in many years, the responsibility of solving that problem rested with her. Early that summer, Sophie moved into the house. The first days were simple and quiet, almost unfinished. We spent an afternoon painting the kitchen a soft shade of green she liked. Later, we stood in the hardware store debating cabinet handles as if it were a serious architectural decision. Nothing about the house was extravagant, but every room felt like possibility. One evening, we sat on the bare living room floor with takeout containers between us because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. The windows were open and the air carried the calm sound of a neighborhood settling into night. Sophie looked around the empty room for a long moment before speaking. She said she didn't think anyone had ever chosen her first like that before. I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I understood that feeling more than I had ever admitted. After a moment, I told her something simple. I said that when I was younger, I didn't think anyone would choose me first either. That was when I realized something I had never fully understood before. Favoritism inside a family rarely ends with conversations. Speeches don't change it, explanations don't fix it, and fairness isn't restored by asking politely. It ends when someone quietly makes a different decision. My parents might still believe that I disrupted the balance in our family. Maybe from their perspective, I did. But that balance had always required one person to bend further than everyone else. This time, I chose something different. I chose to let my daughter begin her life standing straight, with a door she could open, using a key that belonged entirely to her.